Okay, well, welcome to Spotlight. Today we're going to be talking to Peter Labelle, and we're going to be talking about one of his favorite hobbies, I believe. It's designing glass projects, which I guess in the old days we used to refer to as stained glass windows. I don't know what they call them nowadays, but we'll find out.
Ralph.
I'm sorry?
We do. We still call them that.
Oh, there still are stained glass windows. Okay. That makes me feel better, Peter. At least I don't feel totally aged on this. First of all, Peter, why don't you tell us a little bit about who Peter Labelle is?
Well, I'm a resident of Cavendish. I have my small business here that I do stained glass, do other things. I'm affiliated with the Cavendish Community Fund and the Cavendish Community and Conservation Association. I have been the Cavendish Town Auditor until recently, and I'm retired after many years of work, but this is what I do now. I work on stained glass pieces.
Okay. Peter, how did you get into stained glass, working with stained glass windows?
Well, it's interesting. About 25 years ago, I took a class at Fletcher Farm Craft School in doing basic stained glass. And I just found it interesting. I found that I could create things and I enjoyed doing that. So I started doing it then, 25 years ago. Had a few pauses while I was doing other things like, working for a living. But eventually, I sort of took it on more and more full time.
Okay. Now, first of all, I think it'd be interesting to see how you actually create a specific project. And I think you would suggested that we use the Cavendish logo that you put together as a stained glass window.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I do is first thing I do is come up with an idea.
Okay.
And one of the things that I came up with was to create the logo for the town of Cavendish as stained glass. This was not something I drew. Most of my stuff I draw, but Rich Sveck had drawn this years and years ago. So what I did was I adopted what he did and adapted it for stained glass. The first thing I had to do was draw what I'd call a cartoon. In stained glass, that's what you call it, a cartoon. Okay. And it's with a pencil sketch, a drawing of what eventually will be the stained glass window, designating each piece, each separate piece with a number so that you can match up those numbers to the different colors of glass and cut them and fit them, so forth. Once I have that drawn, the cartoon drawn, I put some color in it. I like to do it with just crayons and color the picture in. My inner child comes out and I get an idea of what it's going to look like, and I can make adjustments to the colors and adjustments to other parts of it. Once I have an idea of exactly what I'm going to do, that cartoon I duplicate. I have a couple of copies of it. You're old enough to remember this, Ralph, but
thanks a lot.
Do you remember carbon paper?
Yes, I do remember carbon. I vividly remember it.
Yeah. As do I. I mean, I'm sure not too many younger folks remember or know carbon paper, but that's what I use. I just use carbon paper, blank sheet of paper, and I'll trace over that cartoon and make 2 additional copies. One copy, I will then take a pair of scissors and cut it apart so that every piece that that's going to represent a single piece of glass is a single piece of paper. And that can be a lot. I mean, I've had some, I don't remember how many numbers I had on this one, but you know, it runs into the hundreds of pieces. Once I have all of those cut out, then I can take each piece of paper, put it on the stained glass that I'm going to use for that color. I trace around it with a marker pen, trace around the paper, the pattern, and then using a cutter, a glass cutter, I'll cut that piece out. Then I put that piece of glass on a grinding wheel, because let's face it, when you cut a piece of glass, you're breaking it. And breaking a piece of glass, you end up with some incredibly sharp edges. It can be lethal. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get rid of those edges. So I will put it on a grinding wheel that will smooth the edges. And once the edges have been smoothed, I can handle it with a lot less care. And also using the grinding wheel, I can make little adjustments to it, you know, to take a little bit off here and there, because those pieces of glass have to fit precisely against the next piece. So as I go along, I will cut the pieces of glass, grind them, and then I put foil on them. And the foil that I use, it's a copper foil. Here's some right here. Very thin, extremely thin. You can peel the backing off of it. Easier said than done sometimes, but there you can see that I've peeled the backing off of this, and it has glue on it. So the glue will then stick to the side of the piece of glass. Let me see if I have yeah, here's a piece. I'm doing this from my shop, so I've got all of this stuff here that I can demonstrate. Here's a piece of glass that I'm working with right now. I cut it, ground it, and then put foil along all of the edges. Now, the reason for doing the foil is I'm going to put these up against each other, and then I'm going to melt solder onto all the edges to hold it together.
You still use solder?
Oh, yeah. Solder will not stick to glass, but it will stick to the copper. I mean, you see plumbers use solder all the time, putting together 2 pieces of copper for plumbing. And that's all I'm doing, same thing. So once I have all those pieces foiled, then I put them together. And putting them together just means placing them on the cartoon. Remember, I said I made multiple copies of the cartoon. One of them I cut out into pieces. The other one sits on a workboard, and that's the one I put all the cut pieces on. So as I assemble it, I'll put those pieces on the cartoon, fit them in, hold them in tightly, you know, one at a time. I'll move right along. And let's see. As I move along, I fill it in slowly but surely until I get the whole thing complete. And then once it's complete, then all the pieces are together. I get the solder, put the solder on all the foil edges, and it tightly holds it together as one piece. Now put it together, well, most of the time my pieces are just silver solder. You put a little wax on those and pieces, clean up the glass, brighten up the solder, and looks terrific. If you want, you can change the color of the solder and make it black. And I do that on occasion, depending on the piece. Or you can make it copper colored. And sometimes I do that. I do a lot of small maple leaves that I put copper color on the solder, and just makes it look a little better. So then I put it in a frame, and frames come in a variety of shapes and sizes, but what I do is I reuse old window frames. So looking behind me right now, you can see one of my pieces. And this happens to be a 9-panel piece. Here's a 6-panel piece. This has got 8 panels in it. This has 4. Interestingly, you can see they're triangular. That I actually had to build that frame. It was just an open, wide frame, and I had some help with an expert carpenter to make those mullions the way they are. Here's another one. This is 2 6-panel pieces standing next to each other. And this was 4 pieces, 4 panels that I did. All of these were old window frames that people had thrown away. Folks at the transfer station love to see me coming. Let me just show you another one. You can see behind me 2 pieces that I did recently. I just finished this one, and that's 8 pieces, 8 pieces of glass. One next to it is 6 pieces. This is a frame that's identical to the one that I did with the 8 pieces.
Now that is essentially
Kind of hard to see, but what it was an old window frame. Paint was peeling off. It was filthy. Each of the windows, the glass pieces were either broken or cracked. So I took all the glass out, sanded it down, repainted it, and now I will make something that I can use to put in here in place of the glass that I took out. I don't know what I'm going to do with this one yet. I just did the frame.
Now, Peter, I assume that those frames that you're making are beveled so that they'll hold the glass inserts.
Well, it's the same. It's exactly the same as the windows. The window that you have. You have divided lights. They're individual pieces of glass, and they fit into the window frame, and you put little glazing points to hold them in, and then you put some glazing compound around the outside,
Okay.
and that's a window. And that's exactly what I do. It's just that I take out the piece of glass and I put in something that I've created.
Okay, now, you've already referred to a lot of the materials you use. Now, in terms of the solder,
Yeah.
how difficult is it to get that solder that fine? I mean,
Well,
you obviously are following the tape that you're putting on the glass.
Exactly. If you use really thin tape, I'm using a 3/16 right now on pieces that I'm doing. This little piece I held up earlier, it's a piece of 3/16 tape that goes on it. The profile of the tape is very narrow. Solder will only stick to that tape. So you get two pieces of glass next to each other with the tape on them. That's what the solder sticks to and holds them together.
Okay. And that holds them together fairly strongly in order to.
Well, for a piece the size of what I'm talking about, which, that frame that I just held up. Well, the frame, the piece that I'm making right now, I'm working on has 10 divided lights. It's a little bigger than the usual ones that I've done, but each of those 10 panes is 10 inches high by 16 inches wide. And once you've put one of those together, it's pretty strong. There are some things you have to be careful of when designing the piece. I have to make sure I don't have like a straight line of solder going from side to side or from top to bottom, because that would be a weakness in the piece.
Okay.
If that line goes at an angle, it will, or not so much an angle, but if you look at the piece behind me, you'll see curlicues and curves. Those curves really strengthen the piece.
Now, why do they strengthen it versus what the straight line would do?
Well, if there's two pieces together held in a straight line and they're soldered together, they would have a weakness on that solder point. So if it were to go from the top to the bottom of a piece, then that weakness could allow it to break.
Okay.
More likely if it were a cross piece going across, then over time that could weaken it and gravity would just make it fail. Whereas if you've got the curlicue there, the curved pieces, it's not going to do that.
And just out of curiosity, when they were building stained glass windows, say in the Middle Ages for churches, were they essentially following the same type of pattern, or did they actually have metal that they framed around the glass pieces?
I was actually hoping you'd ask me that because they did it completely differently. I don't have an example of that right now, but those pieces, and if you go into a church today and you see a really large representation of saints or whatever, that's completely different than what I do. Completely different. First of all, they're soldered joints, but they're not soldering the pieces of glass together. In fact, those pieces of glass have what's called lead cane in between them. And the lead cane, let me see, let me go grab a piece that I can demonstrate with. Hang on. All right. This is a piece of lead. It's a piece of lead cane. It has a slot going down the side, and it has a slot going down the other side. Then on each of the edges, it's curved. So this will go on the plane with one piece of glass fitting in this slot another piece of glass fitting in this slot. And this will be between the two pieces of glass. Since it has a nice curve, and they're not all curved, some of them are flat, but this is curved in between. That's what you see between the glass. Now, where they join, this one would join to another one, that joint would be soldered. But the lead that's in between all of the pieces of glass is a preformed piece of lead cane. It's manufactured, it's, you can buy them, I buy them in like 6 or 8 foot lengths. I've done some reconstruction work on church windows. There's 2 of them in the Cavendish Baptist Church. Those windows dated to, I would estimate, sometime in the 1880s, and had been replaced sometime in the 1930s. And the original ones had sat in the attic for over 120 years when I got them. Well, I shouldn't say that long, no, from the 1930s to about, the early 2000s. So over 70 years, 75 years. They were in very tough shape. A lot of broken pieces. The lead had totally degraded over time. And I had to just totally take it apart, put all new lead in, put it back together again, fit it back in the frame. That was, I don't want to do that again. That was too much work.
Okay,
This is a lot more fun. These are a lot more fun.
if I could just follow up on that now, let's take an example of some of the great churches of Europe,
Yeah.
medieval times. Now, those do they have to be maintained periodically because of the lead weakening?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Those would have to be. Maybe it'll take 100 years before that lead is so bad that it's not structurally sound. But eventually, yeah, it will weaken and will have to be replaced. And there are some master craftspeople in Europe that do that.
Oh God, I imagine they have a devil of a job with some of those stained glass windows.
Oh, yeah. Well, don't forget, those are, again, you see a massive window. It's not all one window. It's not all one piece. It's just like I do, in that it's made in sections. So you may have a section that's 2 feet wide by 3 feet tall, which is bigger than what I generally do, but it's not quite as massive as the whole window. Or if it is bigger than that, and sometimes they are, what it has is structural steel soldered to the back of the panel to give it rigidity so that it won't over time warp and change shape. And all of that needs to be maintained.
God, that must take an awful, number one, a great deal of experience, plus an awful lot of time to work on some of those windows.
Well, those are worked on, as I said, by master craftspeople who work at it full time for a lifetime. And we have people that do that kind of work here, even here in Vermont. As I said, I've done the repair work. I don't like repair work. I'd much rather be creating my own, but I can do it. There are people who do that as a regular business and do it full time, that kind of repair.
Okay, now, what are some of the examples of, you've already shown us how you go through a project. What are some of the projects that you've completed that you could demonstrate to us?
Well, I've been kind of cycling through these behind me in my virtual background. So, these are all ones that I've done
Yeah.
over time. Some of them are real simple. This is
What
really,
about the Cavendish logo itself? I mean, that's what you used as an example of how you put together a project. What does
right.
that look like now? I mean, as totality.
Well, yeah, I have some of those pictures. Let me see if we can get those up. Hang on.
Okay.
Okay, well, I have one that I call Seasons. I put that up behind me a few minutes ago. I have one that's ivy vines. I've got that up behind me also. I've got one that's grapevines. And I've got one that's the Cavendish logo. So you can see the final picture of the Cavendish logo has a nice colored frame around it. What I did with this when I finished it was I put 4 pieces of clear glass that has a pattern on the back so that you can't truly see through it, and made it square, and then put the whole square piece into a square frame. And that is currently hanging in the Cavendish Town Clerk's office.
Okay. And I believe we're going to have some of those photos added later on. Now, this began as a hobby, I take it.
Yeah.
Now it's become sort of a business.
Nope. It's still my hobby, Ralph.
Well,
I'm playing with these backgrounds.
how long does it take? Let's use the Cavendish logo as an example. How long did it take you from start to finish to get that complete?
Well, it takes me a lot longer than somebody who's doing this as a full-time job. I probably could have done that one in a couple of weeks, whereas it probably took me more like a month. I'm doing one now that's got 10 panes in it. I'm estimating it'll take me a couple months. And that's because I only work at it a couple hours a day. There are days when I don't get here at all. I've got other things to do. For 3 months, I was auditing the Cavendish Town books. I was not able to get here into the shop to do any work. So the piece that I had started back before I started doing the auditing, add 3 months to it, so it took me a long time to finish it.
Okay, now do people make requests of you to create some of these things, or are these all your own idea?
These have all been my own. They're not necessarily fully from my conscious mind. This one behind me, the ivy vines, I got the idea when I was in a restaurant I think it was in Green, Texas. And they had some stained glass going around the room above their windows that were ivy vines. And I looked at those and I thought, I can do that. And, here it is. That said, I had the idea that way, but then I had to sit down and draw these. So I had to draw everything that you see behind me as a template that I then created the cartoon from and created the pieces, put them all together. Others that I have the one that we saw a minute ago that was grapevines. Well, there's a stained glass window in a museum in Sarasota, Florida, that is very similar and gave me the idea. It's not the same. I did it differently. I used different materials. I used a different pattern. But having seen that, well, I decided I wanted to do that. So I sat down with pieces of paper and pencil and drew it the way I wanted it to be, and then created it. Went through the process. I have done a few pieces where I had patterns that someone gave me, and I used those patterns to create the window. But in each case, I added to it. I added my own little touches to it to make it something a little bit different that was mine.
That sounds absolutely fascinating about how you do this. Just as a matter of information, my father was a picture framer and gold gilder. And so when you were talking about the framing, et cetera, it sort of rang bells to me about that.
Tried.
He also used to employ me to cut glass.
So you've done it. Okay.
But that was a very short-lived experience because he discovered that I was absolutely terrible at it.
Well, one thing about cutting glass, always have a box of Band-Aids nearby.
Well, I learned that. Quickly.
Oh yeah, I use them all the time.
And
I'm not a carpenter, so I've tried making frames. And the result is not always pretty. So I found there are so many frames out here, around. A number of people have asked me, do you want some more frames? People who have them sitting in the back of their barns where they've been for forever. That's such an easy thing to do, is to recycle old frames.
Some of those windows reminded me of what I used to refer to as half windows or cellar windows.
Yeah.
Are they?
Yeah, some of them are. Yeah. Oh yeah. Most of these, like the one sitting behind me, I'm sure that came out of a barn somewhere. I mean, it's pretty big. It's got 9 panes in it. And they're fairly good sized panes. So, it probably came out of a barn. It was pretty tough shape when I got it, but fix it up.
Okay, now, so what projects are you envisioning in the future now for stained glass windows?
Well, I'm working on one now that is going into an art gallery. But I've got 3 or 4 ideas that have stacked up that I've just got to get to, and I'm not sure what my next one will be. I'm never sure more than one ahead of what I'm going to be doing.
Now, are you having any problem getting materials? I mean, the glasses, you mentioned the glasses came in different colors.
Yeah, I've got a pretty good selection of glass, but I'm always I always have to go out and buy new. The one that I'm working on right now, I did not have nearly enough. I said it was 10 panes of glass. That's a lot. And I did not have nearly enough pieces to do it. So I had to go to a stained glass store, one that has large pieces of glass. I had to buy a couple of pieces that were like 6 feet by 4 feet. Just big enough to fit in the back of my truck, and then bring them home, cut them up. When I did the windows in the Gethsemane church, in Proctorsville after Irene. I don't know if you remember, but that church was knocked right off its foundations.
Yeah, yes, I do remember.
And when that happened, a lot of those windows broke. They're simple windows, with one exception. They're simple windows with just colored glass, but they're large pieces of colored glass. And they're not easy to cut and fit. So I had to, I went up to Burlington to a store up there and had him order all of the glass for me. And I was fortunate that he was able to find glass that was very close to what was already in the windows, so I could replace them.
Now, how much of the glass is manufactured in this country versus has to be imported?
Oh, a lot of the glass is manufactured here, an awful lot. There's a dozen or more manufacturers in this country. A lot of them make regular glass as well as stained glass, you know, so they've got two lines of business there. In fact, I don't know that I've used any imported glass. I may have, not knowing it, but as far as I know, everything I've used has been made in the USA.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, well, you know, Peter, I really want to thank you for taking this time to tell us about this, because I find your project personally very, very fascinating. And it's something that you probably would guess I would not be inclined to be involved in myself after my own experience.
Yeah. Well, let me show you one more that you'll recognize, Ralph. Since you and I used to be on the board,
yes.
that's with the Good Neighbors.
Good Neighbors.
This one, unfortunately, it's backwards. I don't know. That had to have been when I took the picture, but this is hanging in the store right now. It's such a simple logo. It was very, very easy to make. Didn't take long at all.
Yeah, it has a lot of curved lines in it too.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, it's part of doing it.
Okay. Well, Peter, thank you very, very much. This has been a
you're
real
welcome.
pleasure talking to you about this.
Always glad to be on your show, Ralph.
I want to thank Peter for coming in to tell us about this. It's a fascinating hobby, and it's almost like an occupation. And also, it's got an awful lot of history in it. I hope the viewers have enjoyed this. And that's going to be a wrap for now, and we'll see you sometime in the future.